Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sleepy Shadows. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and fall asleep. If today was long or heavy, I'll do my best to make your night a little more comfortable with these stories. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy calm, quiet horror stories like these, you're welcome to subscribe. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. The case of Lacey Fletcher is one of those stories that is difficult to talk about, not because it is confusing or mysterious, but because it is so painfully clear. There are no unanswered questions about what happened. No complex motives to untangle. No unknown suspects. Just a slow, preventable tragedy that unfolded in plain sight over many years. Lacey Fletcher was 36 years old when she was found dead on a couch in her parents' home. Her parents, both in their mid-60s, were the ones who found her. By that point, however, what had happened was not sudden. It was the result of more than a decade of extreme neglect. Lacey suffered from severe agoraphobia and other mental health issues. At some point in her mid-20s, her condition worsened to the point where she became unable to leave the couch in the living room. But what began as fear and anxiety slowly turned into complete physical immobility. For approximately 12 years, from around the age of 24 until her death, she remained on that same couch. Mental illness can be debilitating, but it does not exist in a vacuum. People who are that severely ill require care, supervision, medical attention, and intervention. Lacey did not receive those things. Her parents did not seek sustained medical help for her. They did not arrange long-term treatment. They did not ensure her basic hygiene or physical care. Over time, her body weakened, her muscles deteriorated, and her ability to move declined further until she was completely unable to get up on her own. What makes this case so disturbing is not just the outcome, but the length of time over which it happened. And this was not a short lapse in judgment or a moment of overwhelm. This was neglect stretched across 12 years. When authorities later examined the scene, it became clear that Lacey had been living in conditions no human being should ever endure. She was left sitting in her own waste. She was not cleaned properly. She was not repositioned to prevent injury. Insects were present. Her skin and body had deteriorated in ways that only happen when someone is left without care for an extended period of time. Even more heartbreaking is the evidence that Lacey tried to survive. Unable to move, unable to access proper food or help, she attempted to keep herself alive by any means available to her. This was not someone who had given up. This was someone trapped, physically and mentally, relying entirely on the people around her to intervene, where they did not. Eventually, her body could no longer endure the conditions it was subjected to. She died on that couch, not from a sudden illness, not from an unavoidable medical condition, but from prolonged, severe neglect. Her death was ruled a homicide by neglect. That distinction matters. This was not an accident. It was not an unforeseeable outcome. It was the result of ongoing decisions, or lack of decisions, made by the people responsible for her care. Parents have a legal and moral duty to protect their children, even when those children are adults who are vulnerable due to illness or disability. In this case, that duty was not fulfilled. The public reaction to Lacey Fletcher's case was one of shock and disbelief. Many people struggled to understand how something like this could happen in a modern society, inside a family home, as without intervention. Others asked how neighbors, relatives, or authorities had not noticed sooner. But neglect often hides in quiet places. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't always involve visible violence. Sometimes it looks like avoidance, Sometimes it looks like denial. Sometimes it looks like people convincing themselves that doing nothing is easier than facing a problem they don't know how to solve. Mental illness complicates everything. Caring for someone with severe psychiatric conditions can be overwhelming, frightening, and exhausting. But those difficulties do not excuse abandonment. They make support more necessary, not less. Lacey's case forces uncomfortable questions about how society handles severe mental illness, about how easily vulnerable people can be forgotten when care becomes difficult, about how long suffering can go on behind closed doors when no one steps in. It also challenges the idea that neglect is passive. What happened to Lacey was not simply the absence of action. It was an ongoing failure to provide food, hygiene, medical care, and basic human dignity. Over years, that failure became lethal. What makes the story especially painful is imagining the passage of time. Day after day, year after year, a life shrinking down to the size of a couch, a world reduced to the same walls, the same room, the same position, a person becoming less visible, less acknowledged, until they were barely seen at all. Lacey Fletcher did not die because help was impossible. She died because help was withheld. Her story is not one of mystery or intrigue. It is a warning, a reminder that neglect can be as deadly as direct violence, and sometimes far more prolonged. It shows how mental illness, when met with denial instead of care, can trap someone in a situation they cannot escape on their own. Remembering her means acknowledging that what happened to her should never happen again. It means recognizing that vulnerability demands responsibility, not avoidance. And it means understanding that the absence of care can destroy a life just as surely as any weapon. Lacey Fletcher deserved safety. She deserved dignity. She deserved help. And she deserved to be seen. This happened to me about 10 years ago, and even now, with time and distance, it still sits with me in a way I can't fully explain. It's not fear, exactly. It's more like a loose thread in the fabric of how I understand the world. Something small, but persistent. Something that never quite resolved itself. My best friend growing up was named Steve. We had known each other since we were kids. The kind of friendship that forms early and feels permanent at the time, even though life eventually proves otherwise. As adults, we drifted apart. Careers, distance, stubbornness, all the usual reasons people lose touch without ever really meaning to. But despite that, he was still Steve. Still someone I thought about now and then. We had only recently started talking again after many years of silence. Nothing dramatic. Just checking in, catching up, testing the water to see if that old connection was still there. It felt good, even if it was awkward at first. Steve was a difficult person. I say that with affection, not judgment. He could be abrasive, opinionated. He didn't suffer fools gladly, and didn't make much effort to be liked. He never married. He had been estranged from his family for nearly a decade by that point. In many ways, he had chosen isolation, even if he wouldn't have described it that way. One thing about Steve that everyone knew was how much he hated technology. And I mean hated. No computer, no cell phone, no email, no internet. Nothing. He had a television with an antenna and a landline phone. That was it. He saw modern technology as invasive, unnecessary, and vaguely insulting. He trusted physical things. Wires, buttons, objects you could see and understand, and that detail matters more than I realized at the time. I was away on a business trip when I got the news that he had died. It was sudden, unexpected. No long illness, no warning. Just a phone call that rearranged the shape of my thoughts in an instant. Because Steve lived alone and had cut himself off from most people, his body wasn't discovered right away. It took weeks. That fact haunted me then, and it still does now. The idea of him dying alone and going unnoticed for that long felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. It added a layer of sadness that never quite faded. I attended what arrangements there were. I saw his sister and brother for the first time in years, just recently, actually. Life has a way of circling back like that. But at the time, everything felt unfinished. Not long after returning home, I had to leave again. That work required it. There was a course being held in Texas, and I was scheduled to attend. I packed, traveled, and tried to compartmentalize grief the way adults often do. Put it aside temporarily. Deal with it later. I was sitting in class when it happened. My phone was on vibrate, silent, tucked away like it always was during sessions. Then it buzzed. I glanced down. It was Steve. That's the moment my body reacted before my brain did. A cold flush washed over me, starting somewhere deep in my chest and spreading outward. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. For a split second, my mind simply refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Steve was dead. I knew that. I didn't answer. I was in class, but more than that, I didn't know what answering would even mean. The phone stopped vibrating. The moment passed, but it didn't really pass. It just settled. Later that day, once I was alone, I called the number back. There was no answer. That at least made sense. At the time, I worked for a satellite telecommunications company. I wasn't a casual user of technology. I lived inside it professionally. My job involved managing back-office telecom equipment. I understood call routing. I understood SS7 networks, routing tables, reassignment protocols. I knew how phone numbers move, how they're recycled, how calls can sometimes appear to come from places you don't expect. So my brain immediately went to explanations. Maybe his number had been reassigned to someone else, and they misdialed me. Maybe someone had taken over his old landline and accidentally hit a redial code on a POTS desk phone. Those things happen. They're rare, but they happen. Telecom systems aren't magical, or they're complex, and complexity creates edge cases. I told myself that. I still tell myself that. But none of those explanations sat quite right. The timing was too strange, the coincidence too sharp. Steve hadn't called me in years before we reconnected, and now, shortly after his death, my phone lights up with his name while I'm hundreds of miles away, sitting in a classroom. It wasn't frightening in the traditional sense. There was no sense of being watched, no fear of something following me, no supernatural presence. What I felt instead was disorientation, like reality had briefly skipped a beat. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in spirits reaching out from beyond. I don't believe in signs or messages or afterlife communications. I've always been firmly grounded in rational explanations. Physics, systems, probability. And those things make sense to me. But that incident did something subtle. It didn't convert me. It didn't suddenly make me believe in anything new. What it did was introduce doubt. Not about what happened, but about how complete my understanding of coincidence and randomness really is. Because sometimes, an explanation being possible isn't the same as it being satisfying. Even now, years later, I can walk through every technical scenario that could account for that call. I can outline how it might have happened. I can explain how networks behave and how numbers are reused and how glitches occur. And yet, there's a part of me that remembers that cold flush, that instant recognition that something was wrong before I had time to reason it away. That sense that, for just a moment, the world didn't behave the way it was supposed to. Wood Steve hated technology. He didn't use it casually. He didn't experiment with it. He didn't interact with it beyond necessity. And somehow, through the very thing he distrusted most, his name appeared on my phone after he was gone. I don't assign meaning to it in a mystical sense. I don't think he was calling me, but I also don't dismiss the impact it had on me. Grief does strange things to perception. Coincidence feels heavier when loss is fresh. Patterns emerge where there may be none. I understand all of that. I've spent enough time inside systems, both human and technical, to know how easily the mind fills in gaps. Still, there are moments in life that don't demand belief, but invite humility. The recognition that not everything fits neatly into the boxes we've built for understanding the world. That sometimes, even when an explanation exists, the emotional weight of an event lingers independently of logic. That call didn't change what I believe, but it did change how firmly I hold those beliefs. It reminded me that certainty is often an illusion, and that the universe occasionally presents us with moments that don't ask to be explained so much as acknowledged. Steve is gone. That much is undeniable. But for one brief vibration of a phone in a classroom in Texas, it felt like the boundary between absence and presence blurred just enough to make me pause. And that pause, that hesitation, that quiet reconsideration of assumptions, has stayed with me far longer than the call itself ever did. This happened years ago, but it still feels close in a way that's hard to explain. Some memories don't fade with time. They don't soften or blur. They just sit there, intact, waiting for the smallest thing to bring them back exactly as they were. 2 of my best friends died in a car crash. The reason makes it even harder to carry. One of them was driving and texting at the same time. A completely ordinary, stupid, everyday mistake. The kind people make all the time and tell themselves will never be the one that matters. They were supposed to wait for me. I was finishing a test, and the plan was that once I was done, we'd all go together. Nothing dramatic, just a normal day. They got impatient. She decided not to wait. She left without me. That detail has never stopped replaying in my head. If I had finished faster, if I had texted sooner, if I had asked them to wait again, they might still be alive. I know that kind of thinking doesn't help. I know logically that responsibility belongs where it belongs. But grief doesn't care about logic. It rewrites everything around what if. When I got home later that day, I went online like I always did. This was 2005. AEM was life back then. It wasn't just a messaging app. It was how you knew who was around, who was awake, who was alive in your little digital universe. She was online. That didn't feel strange at first. She was always online. Constantly. If anyone I knew was glued to AIM, it was her. So I messaged her. Then again. And again. 6 messages, maybe more. No response. I didn't panic right away. People step away. People get distracted. But something felt wrong. I didn't know why yet. Just a quiet sense of unease that hadn't caught up to my brain. Then the phone call came. They had been dead for about an hour by that point. The crash was severe. Instant. There was no survival window, no chance of help. Just sudden absence where there had been life minutes earlier. Her phone survived the crash. That fact matters more than it should. For another hour after they died, her AIM status stayed online. Green dot. Available. Like nothing had happened. Like she was still there, just ignoring me. Then she went offline. Her phone finally died. I remember staring at the screen, watching her name disappear, and feeling something close over in my chest. Like a door slamming shut. That was the moment it became real in a way nothing else had. 2 weeks passed. Those weeks were a blur of funerals, silence, guilt, anger, and disbelief. And the world kept moving in ways that felt obscene. People laughed, school continued, technology kept working, and my friends were just gone. Then one day, she logged back on. Her screen name appeared on my buddy list like a punch to the gut. For a split second, my brain didn't know how to react. It was pure instinct, adrenaline, shock. My heart started racing so fast it hurt. My hands were shaking as I typed. I lost it. I started demanding to know who it was, what the hell they were doing, why they were using her account, how they got access. I wasn't calm, I wasn't rational, I was hysterical. Then I saw the typing indicator. That little notification that means someone is writing back. It appeared. It stopped. Appeared again. Stopped. I remember staring at it, barely breathing, my entire body locked in place. Yeah, every rational part of my mind was screaming explanations. Someone found her phone. A family member. A friend. Someone logged in to notify people. But another part of me, a quieter and more dangerous part, whispered something else. If anyone could punch through something like that, it would be her. She was addicted to AM. She lived on it. It was part of her identity. For several long seconds, that thought felt terrifyingly real. Like maybe, just maybe, this was some kind of impossible connection breaking through. I knew it wasn't. I know it wasn't. But grief makes space for thoughts you'd normally never allow. Then the typing stopped. She logged off. Forever. Nothing was ever sent. No explanation. No goodbye. Just silence. Again. To this day, I don't know who accessed her account. In 2005, security wasn't what it is now. Passwords were simple. Phones weren't locked the same way. It could have been anyone who handled her belongings. A family member. A friend. Someone who thought they should tell people and then froze. Or someone who opened the account, realized what it meant to be there, and couldn't do it. What haunts me isn't that someone logged in. It's that they almost said something. Whatever they were going to type died halfway through, just like she did. Another unfinished thing. Another moment cut short. That incident messed with me for a long time. Not because I thought it was supernatural, but because it lived in that space between logic and emotion, where grief does its worst work. Where you know the truth, but your heart keeps testing the edges anyway. Technology makes death strange. Accounts stay active. Names remain visible. When digital footprints don't disappear when people do. And sometimes, those remnants collide with grief in ways that feel cruel and surreal. For a few minutes that day, the past opened up just enough to hurt all over again. I don't believe it was her. But I also can't pretend it didn't affect me deeply. It reinforced how sudden loss leaves no clean edges, no proper endings, just fragments. Green dots that shouldn't be there. Typing indicators that stop mid-thought. Conversations that never get finished. She didn't mean to die that day. They didn't plan to leave without me. And whoever logged into that account didn't mean to reopen wounds they couldn't close. But intention doesn't matter much once something is done. What stays with me most is how normal everything looked on the screen, while nothing was normal anymore. How easy it was for a name to appear online, while the person behind it no longer existed. It taught me something I didn't want to learn that young. That closure isn't guaranteed. That goodbyes don't always happen. And that sometimes, the hardest part of losing someone isn't the moment they die, but the moments afterward when they almost seem to come back. Even now, years later, I still remember that green dot. And I still wish, just a little, that whatever was being typed had been sent. Even if it was just goodbye. When I was 13, I didn't have the words for danger yet. I had instincts, sure, and fear when something felt off. but I didn't know how to separate real threats from stories meant to scare you. At that age, everything older kids said carried weight. They knew more. They had been places. They had seen things. And sometimes, that made their warnings feel half like jokes and half like truths you weren't supposed to question too closely. My best friend and I had started hanging out with a group of older boys. Not men, really, just a few years older than us. But at 13, that gap feels enormous. They could drive, they had cars, they had access to places that felt impossibly far from our quiet suburban streets. Sometimes they would take us out driving. We lived in the suburbs, where everything was paved, planned, predictable. But not far from where we lived, the roads started to change. Pavement gave way to dirt. Streetlights disappeared. Trees closed in on both sides. The world felt darker out there, even during the day. They would drive slowly along those forested, unpaved roads and start telling stories. If we kept going, they said, we'd eventually end up at a Ku Klux Klan camp. They said it casually, like they were talking about a landmark or a weird tourist attraction. They told us we'd probably be okay because we were white, but they still made it sound like a place you didn't want to stumble into by accident. Then they'd go quieter. They'd say that if we kept driving past that, if we really went too far, we'd end up somewhere much worse. A biker place, a farm, a compound, the kind of place girls should never go alone. Ever. They said bad things happened there. Really bad things. At first, my friend and I laughed it off. It sounded like the kind of thing older boys say to scare younger girls. Urban legends, exaggerations, stories meant to make them feel powerful and worldly. But there was one guy who didn't say it like a joke. His voice changed when he talked about that place. He didn't grin or exaggerate. He didn't laugh afterward. He spoke carefully, like someone repeating something they'd heard and believed. Like someone passing along a warning rather than telling a story. He told us the place had a name. Piggy's Palace. That name stuck with me immediately. It was strange and childish and unsettling all at once. It didn't sound like a biker bar or a hangout. It sounded like something someone would name to make it seem harmless. Cute, even. Or they told us never to go there. Never follow anyone there. Never get in a car with someone who said they were taking us there. They said girls went missing. That if you passed out, or got left behind, or trusted the wrong people, you didn't come back. At 13, I didn't know what to do with that information. Part of me filed it under stories. Part of me filed it under things adults will tell you not to think about. And part of me, the quietest part, just remembered the tone of that guy's voice and decided I'd never forget the name. Life moved on. We grew up. We stopped hanging out with those boys. The roads stayed where they were, and Piggy's Palace became just another weird memory from adolescence. Something I'd occasionally think about, and then dismiss. I never went looking for it. I never tried to prove whether it was real or not. 30 years passed, and then the news broke. What had once been a half-believed warning from a forest road became something real, horrifying, and documented. That area, that general location, that kind of place, was tied to one of the most infamous serial murder cases in Canadian history. The farm belonged to Robert Pickton. Pickton was one of several brothers, and the more that came out, the clearer it became that the violence associated with that farm likely went far beyond one man acting alone. But Pickton was the one who took pleasure in it, the one who tortured, the one who targeted women who were vulnerable, women who were left behind, women who were unconscious, women who were drugged, women who were passed around, women no one would immediately look for. He fed victims to the pigs on his farm. That detail alone is enough to turn your stomach. But what haunted me more was how closely it echoed the warnings we'd been given as children. The name. The idea of pigs. The idea that girls disappeared there and were never seen again. It wasn't just a serial killer operating in isolation. Picton was known to go into downtown Vancouver, into areas where vulnerable women gathered, and bring them back to the farm. Sometimes for himself, sometimes for others. The farm wasn't just a location. It was a system. A place where cruelty had been normalized behind closed gates and trees. Looking back, what disturbs me most isn't just the existence of that place. It's that people knew, not in the legal sense, not enough to stop it, but enough to warn teenage girls to stay away. Enough for older boys to speak seriously about it. Enough for a name to circulate quietly, passed mouth to mouth like folklore. Piggy's Palace. A place you don't go. A place you don't ask questions about. A place where bad things happen. At 13, I didn't fully understand what bad things meant. I didn't understand how predators operate, or how violence against women often hides in plain sight, protected by silence and normalization. I didn't understand how entire communities can orbit around a known danger without confronting it directly. As an adult, I understand too much. I understand that warnings don't always come with sirens and police tape. Sometimes they come as offhand comments on a dirt road. Sometimes they come as a shift in someone's voice. Sometimes they come as a name you're told not to repeat too loudly. But what chills me now is realizing how close we might have been without ever knowing it. How easily curiosity, or rebellion, or trust in the wrong people could have led us further down those roads. How many women didn't get warnings at all, and how many did, but had no power to act on them. Robert Picton became a known name eventually, a face, a headline, a symbol of extreme violence. But long before that, he was just part of a landscape people avoided, a rumor, a place girls were told never to go. The danger was real long before it was official. Sometimes, when I think about those drives through the woods, I realize how thin the line is between story and truth. How often we dismiss warnings because they don't come wrapped in authority. How many things we only understand in hindsight. We thought they were trying to scare us. Maybe they were. But maybe they were also trying to protect us in the only way they knew how. By telling us just enough to stay away. And by naming the place, so we'd remember it forever. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Sleepy Shadows for daily calm horror stories made for late nights and sleep. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss a new story when the night gets quiet and the shadows return. Now, let's continue. For several days before it happened, the farm felt wrong. Nothing dramatic at first. Just small things that didn't sit right once you noticed them. The kind of details people dismiss because life on a farm is already full of strange noises and unexplained marks. But in hindsight, those days read like a warning written in pieces. It started with footprints. Fresh tracks appeared in the snow, leading from the surrounding woods straight toward the farmhouse. Heavy, deliberate footprints, as if someone had walked with purpose. The strange part wasn't that footprints existed. It was winter. People passed through land all the time. The strange part was that there were no footprints leading away. They came to the house, and they stopped. The family noticed them. They talked about them. They tried to reason it out. Maybe someone had passed through and the return tracks were covered by fresh snowfall. Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe it was nothing. People want explanations that allow them to go back to normal, and farms demand that kind of practicality. Animals still need feeding. Work still needs doing. Then there were the sounds. At night, there were noises that didn't match the usual creaks of a wooden house. Steps overhead. Shifting weight. Something that sounded like movement in the attic space. Again, nothing that could be proven. Old houses settle. Animals get in. Wind travels strangely through empty beams. Still, the feeling grew. The maid noticed it more than anyone. She spent her days inside the house, alone for long stretches, cleaning, cooking, moving from room to room. She heard things she couldn't explain, felt watched, felt like something was present when no one should have been. She tried to ignore it, but fear doesn't respond well to logic. Eventually, she made a decision that everyone around her thought was foolish and dramatic. She quit. She left abruptly, telling people that the house was haunted, that she couldn't stay there anymore, that something was wrong. People laughed it off. Haunted houses were a common explanation when someone couldn't put fear into words. No one took her seriously. Her decision saved her life. A new maid was hired not long after. She arrived without knowing the full story, without knowing about the footprints, without knowing about the noises, without knowing that something had already been inside the house before she ever stepped through the door. That first night, the house became a trap. Sometime after darkness fell, a man believed to have been hiding in the attic descended into the living areas of the home. He had likely been there for days, maybe longer, listening, watching, learning routines, waiting. What followed was not fast, it was methodical. One by one, the members of the household were lured or forced into an outbuilding under the pretense of something ordinary, a noise, an animal, a task that needed doing. Each time the pattern repeated, each time another life was taken. The most horrifying part is that not all of them died immediately. Several family members survived long enough to understand what was happening, long enough to realize that they were watching the destruction of their own family, long enough to experience fear at a level most people never encounter in their entire lives. When the bodies were eventually discovered, as investigators found evidence that spoke louder than any written record. One of the youngest girls had torn tufts of her own hair out as she was dying. Not in struggle, not in resistance, but in sheer terror. That detail alone tells you everything about the final moments inside that building. After the murders, the story should have ended. It didn't. The killer didn't flee immediately. He didn't panic. He didn't disappear into the night the moment it was over. Instead, he stayed. For several days, someone lived in that house. They slept in the beds. They ate the family's food. They tended to the animals. Milk was collected. Chores were done. The farm continued to function as if nothing had happened. From the outside, it looked normal. From the road, there was no sign of disaster. Inside, the family lay dead, which that fact is almost impossible to process. The level of calm required to remain in a place where you have just murdered multiple people is beyond ordinary understanding. It suggests familiarity with violence, comfort with isolation, and a complete absence of urgency or fear of being caught. Eventually, the person left. No one knows exactly when. No one knows how. There were no clear tracks, no witnesses. By the time neighbors became concerned and entered the property, it was too late. The house had already been abandoned again, this time permanently. The killer was gone. They were never found. No confession, no arrest, no identity confirmed beyond speculation. The case remains one of the most chilling examples of how thoroughly someone can erase themselves after committing unspeakable acts. But what makes this story linger isn't just the brutality, it's the slow build, the way the warning signs were present but unclear, the way fear was dismissed as superstition, the way someone listened to their instincts, left and survived, and the way everyone else stayed. It's the idea that someone was there the whole time, above them, listening to conversations, watching daily life unfold, waiting for the right moment. It's the thought that the house was already compromised long before the violence began. And it's the knowledge that for days after the murders, the world outside that farm went on as normal, unaware that inside those walls, an entire family had been erased, and their killer was calmly occupying their space. Some crimes end when the violence stops. This one didn't. It ended only when silence returned. And even now, long after the tracks in the snow have melted, long after the house fell into history, the unanswered question remains. Who was already there? And how long had they been watching before anyone realized they were never alone? On the evening of March 31st, 1922, something went terribly wrong at a small, isolated farmstead in Bavaria, Germany. The place was known as Hinterkaifeck, though that was not the official name of a village or town. It was more of a local description, a way people referred to the farm because of its remote position. It sat roughly 70 kilometers north of Munich, surrounded by fields and woods, far from busy roads or close neighbors. 6 people lived there. Andreas Gruber, the head of the household, was 63 years old. He was known in the area as a hard man, strict and controlling, not especially well-liked. His wife, Cecilia Gruber, was 72. Their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, lived with them as well. She was 35 and had lost her husband during the First World War. Victoria had 2 children. Her daughter, also named Cecilia, was 7 years old. Her son Joseph was just 2. The 6th person in the household was a new maid, Maria Baumgartner, 44 years old, who had only arrived at the farm that very same day. The farm was isolated even by rural standards. At night, it would have been completely dark. No streetlights, no nearby houses within easy shouting distance. The only sounds would have been the wind, the animals, and whatever noises the old wooden buildings made as they settled. In the days and weeks leading up to the murders, strange things had already been happening. Members of the family had reported hearing footsteps coming from the attic. Not creaking wood, not animals. Actual footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth above them. Andreas Gruber had gone up to investigate more than once, but found nothing. But no signs of forced entry, no missing items, no intruders. A previous maid had also heard these sounds. She was so frightened by them that she quit her job and left the farm. She told people she believed the place was haunted. At the time, her fear was dismissed. Old houses make noises, people said. Farms are full of animals. There was no reason to panic. In hindsight, that decision saved her life. Another strange detail would later come to light. In the snow around the farm, there were footprints leading from the nearby woods toward the house. But there were no footprints leading back away again. Someone had come to the farm and stayed. On the evening of March 31st, the violence began. Investigators later believed that the victims were lured to the barn one by one. But the barn was connected to the house, but separate enough that cries would not easily be heard from inside the living quarters. One at a time, 4 of the victims entered that space and were murdered with a mattock, a heavy farming tool similar to a pickaxe. The order of the killings is not known with certainty, but Andreas, his wife, Victoria, and the 7-year-old child were found stacked together in the barn. The positioning of the bodies suggested they had not all been killed at once. Each person likely went in separately, unaware of what had already happened. What makes the case especially horrifying is that some of the victims did not die immediately. Evidence suggested that at least one of them remained alive long enough to fully understand what was happening around them. Which one of the children had pulled out clumps of her own hair in her final moments, a reaction consistent with extreme terror rather than physical struggle. After the murders in the barn, the killer did not leave. Instead, they went back into the house. Inside, the maid Maria Baumgartner and the 2-year-old Joseph were still alive. Both were murdered in their beds, likely later that same night. Joseph, the youngest victim, had not been taken to the barn at all. By the morning of April 1st, everyone at Hinterkaifeck was dead. And yet, the farm did not fall silent. For the next several days, someone continued to live there. Neighbors later reported seeing smoke rising from the chimney, as if fires were being lit inside the house. Animals were fed, cows were milked. Food was taken from the kitchen and eaten. Beds appeared to have been slept in, or the killer remained on the property for at least 3 days. They lived among the bodies. They cooked meals. They tended livestock. They moved through the same rooms where the family lay dead. Nothing about their behavior suggested panic or urgency. There was no sign of hurried escape. Eventually, the killer left. No one knows exactly when. The crime was discovered only after neighbors became concerned. The mail had not been collected. One of the family's children had failed to attend school. People began to suspect something was wrong. When they entered the property, they found the bodies. The murder weapon, the mattock, was later discovered hidden in the loft of the barn. This suggested planning, or at least an attempt to conceal evidence. Despite an extensive investigation, the case quickly became tangled with mistakes, and too many people walked through the crime scene before it was secured. Neighbors, officials, even curious onlookers disturbed evidence. The bodies were moved. The house was searched repeatedly without proper documentation. Potential clues were lost. Suspects were proposed over the years, including former farmhands, neighbors, and even family members. Rumors circulated about incest within the family, about disputes over money, about grudges held by unknown individuals. None of these theories were ever proven. The killer was never identified. What makes the Hinterkaifeck murders stand out, even a century later, is not just the brutality, but the calm, almost domestic nature of what followed. This was not a crime committed in a moment of rage and then abandoned. This was a crime where the perpetrator stayed, settled in, and behaved as though nothing unusual had occurred. Someone slept in those beds. Someone ate that food. Someone fed those animals. All while 6 bodies lay nearby. The farm itself was eventually demolished. The land was cleared. Time moved on. But the case never found resolution. Even today, it remains one of the most disturbing unsolved murders in German history. Not because of how it ended, but because of how long it continued after the killing stopped, and because whoever did it walked away, leaving behind only silence, unanswered questions, and a place forever marked by the knowledge that the danger was already inside the house, long before anyone realized they were not alone. In my own life, long before I understood how ugly reality could get, there was a story that stayed with me because of how close it was. It didn't happen on the news. It didn't involve strangers. It happened in the orbit of someone I had known since childhood, someone whose house I had been to, whose family I had sat around with, never imagining the kind of darkness that was quietly living there. My childhood best friend grew up in a complicated family. There was a lot of instability, a lot of addiction, and a lot of things that people just didn't talk about openly. Her grandfather was an alcoholic. Everyone knew that. It wasn't a secret. It was just one of those things families learn to live around. His girlfriend was also an alcoholic, and their relationship was chaotic in the way only 2 deeply addicted people can be. At some point, the girlfriend disappeared. At first, nobody panicked. She had vanished before. She would go on benders, disappear for weeks, sometimes months, and eventually turn back up somewhere. Her family was used to it. They were exhausted by it. So when she didn't answer calls or show up where she usually did, no one reported her missing. People assumed she would resurface eventually, like she always had. But this time, she didn't. Almost a year passed. Then the grandfather died. When he passed away, things began to unravel in ways no one expected. There were the usual family arguments about belongings, about what would go to whom, about what was fair. One particular argument centered around his car. The car had been parked about a block away from his house, and my childhood friend was supposed to get it. It had been discussed. It was understood. But her aunt stepped in and claimed it instead. My friend was furious, not because the car itself mattered that much, but because it felt like one more thing being taken from her in a family that already took a lot. Out of anger, and honestly a bit of pettiness, she decided to make things difficult. The car was still legally in her grandfather's name, so she called and had it towed, figuring that if she couldn't have it, at least her aunt wouldn't be able to get it easily either. She knew it would turn into a long, annoying process to retrieve it. She didn't expect anything else to come from it. One of the guys working at the towing company happened to be friends with the aunt. He knew the grandfather had died. He knew it was technically her father's car. So instead of just impounding it, he called her and told her what was happening, but giving her a chance to come get the car first. She went to pick it up. When she got there and looked inside the vehicle, she noticed something strange. In the back seat were 2 or 3 large plastic storage totes. They weren't labeled. They weren't locked. Just sitting there, like they had been placed deliberately but without much care. For reasons no one has ever fully explained, she decided to open them right there. Inside the totes were vacuum-sealed bags. Multiple bags, different sizes, all tightly sealed. The material was that cloudy, frosted plastic that makes it hard to see what's inside clearly. She couldn't tell exactly what the contents were, only that whatever was inside was dark in color. At first, her brain tried to make it something ordinary. She thought maybe it was meat, deer meat, maybe. Something someone had hunted and stored badly. Something that had gone off. Then she opened one of the bags. The smell hit her immediately. It wasn't the smell of spoiled food. It was something far worse. Something unmistakable once your brain catches up to what your nose already knows. When she actually looked inside the bag, she saw a human hand. That was the moment everything shifted. She called the police. They arrived quickly, secured the car, and took the totes away. The vehicle was seized as evidence. The aunt never got the car. My friend never got the car. In the end, it didn't matter. The truth inside it outweighed any family argument about ownership. The investigation confirmed what no one wanted to believe. The grandfather had killed his girlfriend, or he had dismembered her and stored her remains in those vacuum-sealed bags inside his car. She hadn't run off. She hadn't disappeared voluntarily. She had been dead for nearly a year, and no one had known. Nothing ever came of it legally. The man who did it was already dead. There was no trial, no sentencing, no public reckoning. Just a grim explanation added to the family's history, and a quiet understanding that something deeply wrong had been happening behind closed doors. That alone would have been enough to scar anyone connected to it. But it didn't end there. Years later, that same childhood friend ended up caught in another tragedy, this time on the other side of the story. By then, her life had taken a dark turn of its own. She had become addicted to meth. The person I remembered from childhood was still there somewhere, but buried under addiction, bad decisions, and the kind of desperation that comes with needing your next fix more than anything else. One night, she was with 2 other addicts, a couple she had fallen in with. They were all high, driving around with no real plan, just chasing the feeling. My friend was driving. The girlfriend was in the passenger seat. The boyfriend was in the back. At some point, they decided they needed money so they could get more drugs. Not tomorrow, not later. Right now. They pulled up to someone, a random guy, under the idea that they would rob him. It wasn't thought through. It wasn't planned carefully. It was impulsive and reckless. driven by addiction and entitlement and a complete disregard for consequences. The boyfriend got out of the car and jumped into the back seat of the man's vehicle, intending to rob him. What they didn't expect was that the man was armed. Almost immediately, the situation exploded. The man pulled out a gun and shot the boyfriend in the head. Then he ran. Just like that. In a moment. My friend and the girlfriend were left there, staring at what had just happened. Panic set in. Instead of calling for help, instead of staying, instead of doing the right thing, they fled. They drove the injured man to a hospital, but instead of bringing him inside or alerting anyone, they pushed him out of the car and took off. Fear, shock, self-preservation. Whatever the reason, that decision sealed their fate. The man did not survive. It took the police months to piece together what happened. Addiction leaves trails. People talk. Stories don't stay buried forever. Eventually, investigators identified both women. They were arrested, charged, and sentenced. My friend went to prison. She served several years, somewhere between 5 and 7. Long enough for life to move on without her. Long enough for consequences to settle in. Long enough for reality to strip away whatever illusions were left. She's been out for a few years now. I don't know her well anymore. We don't talk. Too much time has passed. Too many things have changed. I don't know who she is now or how she lives. I don't know if she's clean. I don't know if she's at peace. What stays with me is how closely violence followed her life, even before she ever touched drugs. How addiction, neglect, and secrecy created a chain of events that kept circling back to the same kind of ending. How one generation's hidden crime became another generation's tragedy in a different form. There's no moral lesson that feels clean here. No neat conclusion. Just the reality that some lives are shaped early by things they didn't choose, and that without support, without intervention, those patterns can repeat in different ways. Sometimes I think about the girlfriend who disappeared and wasn't missed because everyone expected her to vanish. Sometimes I think about the hand in the vacuum-sealed bag. Sometimes I think about my friend as a kid, before any of this happened, before addiction and prison and death followed her through life like a shadow. And it leaves me with the same thought every time. Violence doesn't always arrive suddenly. Sometimes it grows quietly, unnoticed, in families, in habits, in silence. And by the time it's visible, it's already taken more than anyone realizes. I wouldn't call myself a non-believer. I've just never been someone who goes looking for things I can't explain. I don't dwell on the idea of the paranormal, mostly because I don't want to invite anything into my life that I don't understand. Until recently, nothing truly out of the ordinary had ever happened to me, at least not in a way I was aware of. That changed last October. My father took his own life during Hurricane Milton. He lived in Florida. I live in Maine. The distance between those two places has never felt so large. The phone call shattered everything, and almost immediately my husband and I packed up the car and started driving south. Because of the hurricane, it was chaos trying to plan anything. Roads were unpredictable. Hotels weren't answering their phones. Power was out in places. Everything felt unstable. But it took us 3 days to make the drive. By the time we got close, I still hadn't been able to find a place for us to stay. I started checking Airbnb while we were on the road, and finally managed to communicate with someone who had availability. It felt like a small relief in the middle of something overwhelming. We arrived around 7:30 at night. The moment we pulled up, I felt uneasy. I can't point to one specific thing. The place wasn't falling apart or overtly dangerous. It just felt wrong. Quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. Dim, heavy. I didn't want to stay there. My nerves were already shot. and the grief sat in my chest like a weight. But my husband was exhausted. 3 days of driving had taken its toll, and I could see that if I pushed the issue, it was going to turn into an argument. I didn't have the energy for that, so I told myself we'd just stay one night. Find somewhere else in the morning. Just get through the night. We all piled into bed. My husband fell asleep almost immediately. Our dog did too, curled up and breathing softly. I knew I wasn't going to sleep. My mind wouldn't slow down. So I opened a book on my phone and started reading, trying to distract myself. Sometime around 3:30 in the morning, I heard it. It was faint. Very faint. At first, I wasn't even sure it was real. It wasn't like someone knocking on a door or a window. It didn't come from a clear direction. It just seemed to exist inside the house. It was the rhythm that caught my attention. Shave and a haircut, 2 bits. That old knock pattern. Soft, almost tentative. My stomach dropped. I was already uneasy, already emotional, already exhausted. My heart started racing. I lay there completely still, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it. Houses make noises. Old places creak. Stress can play tricks on your senses. Just as I was starting to calm myself down, I heard it again. The same pattern. Still faint. Still not clearly coming from anywhere specific. I put my phone down and listened. I remember thinking that if it happened one more time, I would wake my husband and we would leave. I didn't care if it was the middle of the night. I couldn't stay if it continued. It never happened again. At some point, exhaustion finally overtook fear, and I fell asleep. In the morning, I told my husband about it. He listened, didn't dismiss me, but also didn't have an explanation. We checked out as soon as we could and managed to find a hotel elsewhere, where we spent the next few days dealing with everything that comes with sudden loss. Paperwork, arrangements, conversations you're not ready to have. Then we started the drive back to Maine. On the way, we stopped at my mom's house in South Carolina to spend the night. When we arrived, she was making supper. She took one look at us and said we must be exhausted. She suggested we go lie down until dinner was ready, and said she'd wake us when it was time. It was around 4:30 in the afternoon. I hadn't told her or her husband anything about what happened in Florida. Not a word. They have a small apartment built onto their house with its own entrance. That's where we were staying. We went in, lay down, and almost immediately, both my husband and I heard it. The same knock. This time it was loud. It came from the wall directly behind our heads. Clear, distinct, impossible to ignore. Shave and a haircut, 2 bits. We both froze, and then it never happened again. Later that evening, once my nerves had settled a bit, I told my mom the whole story. When I demonstrated the knock pattern for her, our dog completely lost it, barking, jumping, reacting intensely to the sound. What unsettled me most was that during both actual occurrences, the dog had been present and completely calm. No reaction at all. Not in Florida. Not at my mom's house. Only when I recreated the sound did she react. I don't know what it means. I don't know if it means anything at all. I don't claim that it was my father. I don't claim it was something supernatural. I don't even claim that there isn't a rational explanation somewhere. But I do know that the timing, the repetition, and the familiarity of that sound, especially during a moment of intense grief and exhaustion, left a mark on me. I wasn't looking for a sign. I wasn't trying to find meaning. It just happened. And sometimes, that's the hardest part. Not knowing whether something is coincidence, or stress, or grief echoing in strange ways, or something else entirely. Not knowing whether to assign meaning, or simply let it exist as one of those moments in life that never fully resolves. I still don't dwell on it, but I also don't dismiss it. It sits quietly in the back of my mind, tied forever to that stretch of road, that loss, and that sound that followed me farther than it reasonably should have. And I don't know if I want to know more than that. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just fade away, they stayed with you. Each one was shared to feel real, quiet, and close. Moments that could happen to anyone. Moments where something felt wrong, or nearly did. If you'd like to keep listening to stories that linger long after they're told, consider subscribing to Sleepy Shadows. There are more waiting in the dark, and not all of them disappear by morning. Good night.